I'm going to quickly introduce Meadow, our next moderator. And yeah, if you have to quickly get up, we have ramen over there. But throughout the next panel at your leisure, you can kind of get up and grab things. Okay. So this is Meadow. Meadow is a mental health consultant, coach, and podcast host, using her knowledge gained as a mental health professional to act as a liaison between brands, creators, and online communities with personal development. Her work has been seen with Mad Happy, the Mayfair Group, Lonely Ghost, NAMI, Youth Mental Health, and more. And she is a proud member of the AIM Youth Advisory Board. So thank you, Meadow. And then if the next panelists could join us on stage.
I'm suddenly so aware of how I'm
Barry,
breathing.
Kristen, Sam,
everyone feels so
and Jason.
Sorry, ready? Yep. Come on up. As everyone is getting ramen and kind of getting settled, because we're running a little bit over, I'm going to go ahead and introduce my amazing panelists. First up, we have Jason Wersland right next to me. Dr. Jason is the inventor of Theragun and the founder and chief wellness officer of Therabody. He's deeply involved in Therabody's R&D process, leading a team of scientists and engineers in creating the brand's full ecosystem of award-winning wellness technologies. Dr. Jason has dedicated his life to helping people heal, including giving people access to products that can enhance their health and well-being. Next up, we have Barry Michels. He is the author of The Tools. With his co-author Phil Stutz, they wrote The Tools, the New York Times bestseller in 2012, and its sequel, Coming Alive, in 2017. Barry and his co-author are often referred to as the most sought-after shrinks in Hollywood. Hello. And his client list includes top writers, actors, producers, CEOs, and other creatives. He's published numerous articles, led a variety of workshops, teaches internationally, and still maintains a clinical practice in LA today. Next up, we have Kristen Sargent, the coach and therapist. Kristen is a coach and therapist with a passion for helping people identify and transmute their blocks to their potential and full self-expression. She trained and currently collaborates with Dr. Barry, as well as leads webinars and workshops internationally. She brings a tools-based approach to her work with individuals and groups globally, and with an emphasis on and love for shadow work, which I am so excited to get into today. And last but certainly not least, my dear friend, Sam Aberhart, founder and CEO of the Mayfair Group. Sam's own mental health struggle during her college days eventually prompted her to launch the Mayfair Group back in 2017 as a safe space and happy place on the internet where people can share, get inspired, and connect with one another. Sam shares that vulnerability saved her and enforces the message that you are more than your depression. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited. Okay, today we're chatting self-love for your mental health. And self-love kind of feels like a big overall umbrella term, which I think we can take a lot of different places. But overall, there feels like no right or wrong answer for any one person. So I'd love to just start by getting a baseline of what self-love means to each of you and what is one of your favorite ways to practice it. And anyone can start.
I mean, to me, self-love, initially at least, has to do with how you speak to yourself. Do you speak to yourself the way most people do, which is harshly, demandingly, punitively, negatively? Or do you take care to talk to yourself in ways that are more supportive, encouraging, loving? In my experience as a therapist, most people are brutal with themselves. They talk to themselves in ways that they would never talk to even their worst enemy. And they really need to train themselves to make the inner environment more filled with love and tolerance and kindness, in a sense.
Great answer.
Okay. I think for me, self-love first and foremost is a journey. Like, I feel like we always feel like it's this destination that we get to and all of a sudden we love ourselves, and that is not the reality at all. Even this morning, I just want to be honest, I was having a really anxious morning. I was nervous about doing this. I woke up, wasn't just like in my best present self. And even though we're here speaking on this, like, we are all on this human journey together and we all navigate these struggles together. And so for me, self-love is self-acceptance in the present moment. I feel like we hyper focus on past versions of ourselves, future versions of ourselves. I spent my entire life hyper focusing on past and future versions of myself. And what I've learned is that, again, self-love is self-acceptance of yourself in the present moment. Like how waking up and acknowledging I am enough as who I am today, how I show up, even if all I do is get out of bed today and that's the only thing I do, I am enough in this present moment. So I think that's been the biggest like unlock for me. And even today, that was a struggle, you guys. Like I'm here, but you know, I think it's just that self-acceptance of yourself in the present moment.
I love that we're. Oh, one of the ones.
We might have to.
Thank you. I love that we're talking about this because I feel like, you know, self-love gets bandied about as if it's an easy thing to do. And I think it's really one of the hardest things to do. And what I appreciate, you know, we're going to talk a lot about this figure called the shadow today. And I am so appreciative of meeting Barry and Phil and really getting deep understanding of how to work with this internal figure, because at the end of the day, self-love is really an inside job. There is no formula for it, right? And so the culture, just kind of like the trend conversation before, the culture really tries to feed us, you know, and not necessarily for bad reasons, like, you know, with bad intent, but you know, we get a lot of information from the material world about what is supposed to make us feel good. You know, is that red wine? Is that a bath? Is that yoga? What is that? And at the end of the day, we have to have a way to ask that question, like live in the question for ourselves, ask the question and answer the question, hopefully, at least in our work, on a daily basis in partnership with your deepest highest self, which comes through in our work, shadow, you know, which we'll talk a lot about and help you have access to if you're interested in it. So, but I think that's an ongoing question, and that has to be answered from the inside in an ongoing, very curious way. And the good news is, I think we forget this as, you know, modern beings, but if you ask, you get answers. You know, you have it's what, this gal sitting here, my memory is going, not you, but the one before you, not that, yeah, anyway, what she was saying, this is built in, you know, in our DNA. We just have to remember it. It's there. You know what makes you feel good, you know, but we don't ask the question. So just the, you know, remembering that we can ask is powerful. So.
I liked what Barry started off with. As humans, we think between 60 and 80,000 thoughts a day, and 70% of them are lies. And I think getting to understand where they're coming from, observing these thoughts, not internalizing them, recognizing where they come from, doing the work to understand what are lies and what aren't lies, learning how to give yourself self-talk in a way that shuts down those lies, I think is a really powerful tool for, it's what I've done, it's what's helped me in my life. And I also think there are some physical things we can do that put us in a better state so we can provide that for ourselves. So
I love that you brought that up, actually, because my next question was about coping mechanisms and defense mechanisms' role in self-love, because they do play a role, but I'm curious, particularly for each of you individually or professionally, where is the line between understanding where our defense mechanisms are protecting us from pain in a good way or hurting us from growth?
anyone.
I guess I'll start out. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is just understanding unhealthy coping mechanisms from healthy coping mechanisms or tools, as some might call them. And, you know, I always say I give myself grace and compassion for what I did in a survival chapter of my life, like navigating depression, and navigating some really dark years. I understand that at those moments, I wasn't ready to face my shadow self or face the hardest parts of myself, or even face the fact that like depression just felt like this huge thing that I wasn't even ready to come to terms with. So I think, you know, first of all, give yourself grace, because, you know, we all do what we need to do sometimes in those survival state or fight or flight states that we're in. And secondly, just understanding unhealthy coping mechanisms from healthy ones, and then creating boundaries or tools to replace unhealthy ones with healthy ones. So an example of that for me would be my relationship with my tech. For me, like having depression, believe it or not, my tech was a coping mechanism for me. It was an escapism from my own mind. It was like how I would just grab it and feel like a sense of dopamine or validation from getting on social, not having to be alone with my own thoughts. And so over time, I learned that, that was an unhealthy coping mechanism for me. There's boundaries I can create around my relationship with tech, and I can replace those things with healthier coping mechanisms. So I think the biggest thing for me is like defining and knowing what are the things you resort to when you're feeling low, or you're feeling rejected, or your ego is hurt, or you have some pressure points or relive trauma that comes up. What are the things you resort to, and then how can you create healthier coping mechanisms or tools when you feel those things come up?
Following up on what you just said, I think it's just good to recognize that human beings will do anything they can to avoid pain. We just hate pain. It's understandable. But often the best way to overcome pain is actually to face it and go through it. So that's what I would call it. You wouldn't regularly call that a self-loving technique, but it is a self-loving technique because it respects that you are resilient enough to face pain and overcome it, rather than avoid it with some coping mechanism that's bad for you.
I love that. Tony Robbins said a long time ago, we do more to avoid pain than we do to gain pleasure. And if we could switch that and spend the same amount of time focusing on how to gain pleasure instead of avoiding pain, that's one. And also, for me, I've had a therapist since I was 17. I think having someone in my life that can be my coach. I work a lot with athletics and sports, and some of the best athletes in the world have some of the most amazing coaches. And you would be shocked at how dependent they are on their input. And I think it's really important for us to look at that. Like, we have this avatar that we live in, and it's run by this computer that gets messed up. All the data coming in isn't right. And to be able to work with someone who understands how to navigate through those situations, for me, I have an amazing therapist now, and I would recommend anyone to have that, because it really does give me a sense of self-confidence, and also gives me the steps, simple little rules that I can apply to my life, that after applying them, now I suddenly have this confidence that I didn't have before. And I don't know that I would have that had I not had someone like that in my life. So.
Anything to add? I think I'm okay.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I love that you bring that up too, because my next question was about community and kind of the role and community plays in our own self-love. And I'm curious for the two of you as brand founders with these larger missions, how giving back and engaging with your community fosters that. And then for Barry and Kristen, I'm kind of curious from more of a technical perspective, I guess, how engaging with our community can fuel our mental health and our mental wellness.
You want to start? Okay, I'll start. One of the universal laws that I've learned is the more people you can affect, the stronger sometimes the resistance you have, but the results are really profound. There's a book that I love that has the 5 laws of stratospheric success. And one of them is based on how many people you serve is the sort of blessings that you receive back. And I can tell you from what's happened with Therabody and our company and how we've grown, it's true. It's pretty cool.
So with Mayfair specifically, I actually ideated the company when I was going through a really dark depression in 2016. And at the time, social media felt like this altered reality of life. I know that we all feel that way a lot of the times when we go on social. So I think it was a healing process for me, because I wanted to create an online digital community where people felt seen and understood and loved for who they are. And they felt like they could show up and speak about the things that matter to them, like mental health advocacy and the things that like I felt like I was navigating, but nobody on the internet was talking about. So it was just like this really isolating dichotomy where I'd get a lot online and feel like I was the only person in the world that was navigating those feelings at the time. And so for me, it's just been a really healing process to create a place like that. And obviously our community has grown a lot, and I'm so grateful for that. But it's been a bit healing for my inner child too, because it was kind of like the place that I needed when I was younger, the place that I felt like I needed a place where everybody could show up and speak about these things and advocate for these things and normalize these things and destigmatize them. So that was kind of like my journey in creating it. And I also just want to mention that I think too, something that Meadow and I always talk about is just like advocacy, especially in the mental health space. We feel like it's this thing that we have to be on the front lines, like working at NAMI or, changing legislation on Capitol Hill. And every single day you have the opportunity to create safe spaces for the people around you. And for someone that's navigated really extreme depression, I can tell you that single-handedly, the things that made me feel less alone in those moments and made me feel okay was when someone said to me, like, I actually feel those feelings too, like you are not alone in that. So don't underestimate the power of showing up every single day and creating safe spaces, because it really, really is powerful, and the ripple effect that we can create for safe spaces for conversation, safe spaces for people to show up. And yeah, I think that's just really powerful in how change gets made also.
I love what you just said, especially the emphasis on bringing that real part of you forward. You referenced the inner child, and in our work, it's kind of adjacent. The part of you, the shadow is just the part, just quickly to define the term, is the most vulnerable, the most ashamed, the part you want to hide from the rest of the world. It's what the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung called the dark side of the personality. We don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because it's humiliating, it's embarrassing, it's, shameworthy. The truth is that part of yourself has tremendous potency and potential inside of it. It's actually not what we, the ego, make it out to be. And learning to share your space, your internal space, your consciousness with it is game changing. It's the thing, in my opinion, that makes it possible for you to do what you've done, which is tell the truth and be of who you really are, expose yourself. That is what creates real community, because when you're hiding a part of yourself, again, that shadowy part that you reject and avoid and deny, when you're hiding it, you're actually blocking love, intimacy, and connection. The people who are like you can't find you because they can't see you because you're hiding. So making friends with that part of yourself, becoming more aware of it and conscious, and then being able to lean into fear, as these guys were saying, like bring it out into the world and expose yourself, is going to create real, authentic community. And to your point, it's going to make other people feel safer, because everybody's afraid they're going to be rejected. And so when you're working on that part of yourself, people can feel, right, we're energetic beings, that they're not going to be judged. You feel safer. They're not going to be judged for the thing in them, that they're trying to hide. So, and just from a different perspective, we talk about a life force pyramid. There are 3 kind of dimensions of self that need to be fueled and fostered for you to have access to your full life force. The bottom layer is the physical dimension, the breath work we just did, what you guys just did, and the workout. We have physical bodies, right? And so we have to attend to them and take care of them. The middle layer is relationship and community. And we can't, again, like all this negative messaging, the lies that the world is full of, but we're mostly the purveyors of the lies inside of our own head. We need community to help us dispel the lies, to have that proper, accurate mirroring. So we can get so far ourselves. There's a lot of, personal work we need to do and have to do in order to love ourselves. But finding your right community and then receiving support, being fully seen, helps to dispel the lies. So I would say community is a really big part of mental health.
I'd just like to give you an example of what I regard as a really high functioning community, which is 12-step groups. 12-step groups are organizations where you can go and admit the worst things about yourself, all of the horrible things. I alienated my kids, my wife divorced me, I lost my job, et cetera, et cetera. And instead of being judged, you're loved and accepted. So there are places where, in the language that Kristen and I use, the shadow can be revealed and redeemed rather than judged. That's what makes community so effective, is that you can stop hiding your shadow.
I love that you bring that up, Barry, because I think AA and the peer support model in general is such a good example also of where kind of spirituality plays into this. And your tools in the book, they're described as a daily connection to these life-changing higher forces. And I found personally that this kind of element of spirituality is really missing from traditional mental health settings in a way that leaves people feeling some sort of lack. So I'm curious from the two of you how you found bringing that in is more transformational than basic modalities or traditional modalities alone.
I mean, what was the process of sort of discovering that?
Yeah.
Trial and error,
Yeah.
to be honest. It just, when I started out as a therapist, everything that I said felt kind of superficial. And when I met Phil Stutz, who really has this spiritual orientation to therapy, I began to feel like, oh, there's something really valuable happening here underneath the surface, and I want to learn how to do that, kind of thing. But yeah, it is missing from psychotherapy. Freud was a diehard atheist.
Mm-hmm.
So Jung was more spiritual, but
Mm-hmm.
Freud had more popularity earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's taken a while, but it's much more popular now.
And traditional talk therapy is pretty much based on the idea that by analyzing the past and hovering, I think probably many of us have had the experience of a lot of storytelling about things that happened in the past, and you're talking about the same thing and you're talking about the same thing for a long time, and that through that analysis, change is going to naturally happen. By the way, that's a very left brain approach. That's a lot of figuring out, which I actually don't think works at all. I think, there's many things missing in that approach, but relevant to our conversation, I love Barry and Phil's way of talking about this, because not everybody is comfortable with spirituality or the notion of a God or, higher forces. So I just think of the higher forces as whatever's bigger than my ego. We actually have, a right brain. We have another dimension of ourselves that comes through the unconscious. Again, shadow work is very much about having a way to operationally get in touch with the wisdom, the intelligence, the potency of your unconscious. And tools in our work, shadow is a tool, but there are lots of tools, just help you tap into these forces that are there. They're invisible. They're as real as the quantifiable forces of gravity or electricity or magnetism, but they're psycho-spiritual forces. We've kind of been trained out of that perspective because we're so left brain dominant in our culture, but they're really there. And the good news is, from our perspective, you don't have to believe in anything. Just try the tools and see if your life gets better. The tools, again, for engaging all of this capacity that you have inside of you that none of us as Western, modern, scientific, materialist, rationalists, sorry, had to rant that, are trained to access. So it's right there where you're sitting on a gold mine of wisdom, forces, intelligence that's available.
Sam or Dr. J, do you have a personal spirituality practice that you feel supports your mental health? If you're open to sharing.
I don't know how many times I take a day to just stop and breathe. But I think, our products are amazing, obviously. I think that they speak for themselves, but I don't need that all the time. The fact that I can just stop and breathe, whether I'm on an airplane, sitting in an Uber, sitting in my office, before or after a Zoom call, those moments where I can change the frequency of what's going on inside my body and sort of ground myself, they start to compound. And just like a muscle, it starts to get quicker. Not easier, but just quicker. You get to that place faster. And you start to recognize what that is, where it comes from. So for me, it's just consistently doing that. And I get in my head. I believe those voices sometimes are full of crap, and I have to take a second to be like, wait a minute. And there's places that I also go. There's physical places. I live near the beach. To be able to go down and just feel the breeze coming off the ocean, man, it puts me in a place where everything else sort of seems relative. It's not so intense. So that's what it is for me. I mean, obviously I have other practices that I do. I'm a chiropractor. I have patients that I work with that I really actually feel energized after I work with them. I feel a lot of their energy come to me, and that's also, I think it's kind of a cheat a little bit. I get more from them than they do me, but that's also something that really does fill my soul. That's the way to say that.
Meditation for me has like single-handedly changed my life. I wish I could have started 10 years ago, honestly, but recently, I think it was last year, Meadow introduced me to Jesse Israel, this guy who leads amazing meditations. And part of the practice in working with him was like, you have to meditate. And for someone that is like struggles with toxic productivity and like moving a million miles a minute, it was like the hardest thing for me to adapt. But it's single-handedly changed my life, hands down. I've been meditating for over a year now. And what it does is it gives me the separation from my thoughts and feelings, which I think is such a powerful tool, especially for people that struggle with being consumed by thought or feeling, like we're all talking about these narratives in our head. So I do a meditation every morning. I try to do one at night too. And I don't touch my phone. I have like a whole morning routine and a wind down routine that I do that is completely tech free. I never, ever, ever want to start my day in reaction mode. Like that's like the way that the world tells us to start, check our emails, check our phones. And I think just implementing a small morning routine is just, it's single-handedly, like I said, changed my life. So meditation is like my biggest kind of component of that, but there's a whole morning and night routine. Yeah.
I love that. I'd love to, before we jump into a Q&A, end on a tangible tool. So particularly if Kristen and Barry, you can talk to us a little bit more about shadow and maybe some ways we can all go home today and get a little familiar with these rejected aspects of ourselves, because I think that's how you love yourself wholly, is integrating those. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, if you can learn to love, or at least just accept your shadow, then you can love and accept every part of it, because your shadow is the hardest part to accept. So close your eyes and just imagine a situation where you embarrassed yourself, did something stupid, got really angry at yourself. Just one of those situations in your past where it's like, oh, dude, why did you do that? And look at the you in that situation, doing the stupid thing, messing up, embarrassing himself or herself. And what your immediate response to that figure should be is some sort of judgment. Like, oh, God, I wish I hadn't done that, or that's an awful part of me, or that was stupid, or whatever. But imagine that the self that you're looking at is a separate self living inside of you, and that it's been living inside of you your entire life. And from its point of view, you haven't been a very good host, because all it's gotten from you is judgment, condemnation, or at best, just being ignored. Now stay with me here. Just imagine that this is a real being living inside of you. Gaze into its eyes. And give it some love in whatever form you want. It could be verbal. It could just be you vibe out love to it. With the love, include an apology for being as mean to it as you've been throughout your life. And try to feel a deep, deep empathy for what life has been like for your shadow, which again is that it's at best been ignored and at worst actively condemned by you. And see if your shadow has any response to the love that you're sending to it. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Anybody get anything?
That was so poignant. I felt that. I love that Melania just mentioned how we suppress joy, because when we were looking at our shadow self and you said you haven't been a very good host, I laughed and then was like, oh, don't laugh. I'm here. So that was so great. Thank you for that. I know we've gone a little bit over, so I want to make sure people have time for questions. So let's start a Q&A. Or everyone's thinking about their shadow selves and it's like, actually, I got to go home. I got work
Do
to
the shadows have any questions?
Sydney?
I think when you can be grateful for the gifts that have been given you, it's actually easier to love yourself. Or if you want to put it the other way around, when you live in a world of poverty, emotional poverty, where you're not really grateful for anything that's happening to you, you feel like sort of desiccated and scrunched up inside, and you don't have the love to give yourself that you need. If you want to say it another way, I think gratitude creates a feeling of abundance, and abundance leads to self-love.
I work with people on meditation, and I think I like to say that and remind people that gratitude is the key that opens the door to that space. Sometimes you're in your head, there's things that are going on, whatever's happening that you're trying to meditate out of or get into. Gratitude is usually that key that opens that up. And it's feeling an emotion, something you're grateful for that you have, or going to have. That to me is a really powerful tool. That's what came to me when you asked that.
I was also just going to mention that when Meadow was saying about tools, like something that I feel like, with gratitude or compassion, talking about like shadow self or the way that we show up each day, every night after my meditation, I have like a little inner dialogue with myself. And it's a tool that I do, just thanking myself and giving myself gratitude for like how I showed up that day. Even if, I did, from the world standards, maybe the bare minimum, but for me, that was like a lot of the day. And so I just have that dialogue with myself. We find it so easy to communicate or give gratitude or compassion to the people around us. But like we've all spoken about, it can be hard to implement for ourselves. So I have just like a 1 or 2 minute convo at night. My husband just looks over and like laughs at me. I'm just talking to myself. But I give myself just gratitude for the way that I showed up that day. And for me, that's really helped kind of like change the dialogue to a narrative in my head.
And I encourage everybody to use gratitude as a tool. There's actually a version of a gratitude tool on our website, thetoolsbook.com, called Grateful Flow. But in terms of what we were talking about with that negativity that most of us live in, under the regime of terror of our own making, like 80% of our thoughts daily for most humans are pretty negative. The default mode, because we're human, is going to be, what's wrong with me? What could go wrong? What did I do wrong? Like that's pretty much the default mode network in the brain. And when you find yourself, if you start to track that, like how does that operate in me? You can actually get really intimately aware of what that default mode is in you. In our work, we call it Part X. We have a name for it. But it's really predictable because you know what? It doesn't have to be very creative. The same shit works against us over and over and over again. Most people have about 5 to 10 top greatest hits. And I really encourage you to get granular. Like you can have intimacy with that. It's like, oh, I'm a bad mom, I'm fat. If you're a human with a body, man or woman, you have this around your body. Like, and that's just that part of yourself. Again, I was about to call it Part X. That's what we would say is your Part X. It's just the part that's trying to shut you down, make it impossible for you to be present where love, opportunity, and connection exist. It's trying to get you in a maze of thinking. So I'd encourage you to track that, label that, know how that operates in you. You can get really ahead of that. And then in the moment that you recognize it, use gratitude. Because as these guys said, gratitude, whether you use our tool or any tool, is a mindset shift. It's a state shift. It puts you, it totally defies that negative thinking. It puts you in an abundant universe that's on your side. If you start thinking of all the ways that you're the beneficiary of stuff that you didn't create every day, whether it's the sun, or it's this beautiful community here today, it's your animal. I mean, there's so much evidence that we're taken care of and supported, but our mind doesn't, our mind rubber band snaps back to the other. So we have to, just like boxing, this is the mental muscles. We have to put our focus on how we want to feel, and gratitude, and then, as these guys said, then leads to being in a state where you can love yourself, where you can choose generosity towards yourself instead of that mean slave driver who lives in all of our heads.
It feels like the ultimate reframe to kind of go back to that self-love. I love that. Thank you. So,
Was your question about the athletics?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in situations where it's fight or flight, breathing was something that, I felt would help me out, but there are other components in sports that, at least for me, have really hindered me from being where I guess I place myself in my head, and a lot of it comes from obsessive thoughts, and I guess being scared of failure, and being put in a position that really makes me question whether or not I am good enough to succeed in that task. Like, is there anything that you could?
Yeah, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more you start thinking about, am I good enough to succeed, the less you obey the natural urges of your body to move the way it's supposed to move, and then you make more mistakes, and then you feel even worse about yourself. So it's like one of those negative feedback cycles. At that moment, what sport do you play? Baseball. So at that moment where you get locked, I forget what you called it exactly, but you hesitate or you get locked up. The thing I want you to do at that moment is I want you to explode. And it's an internal explosion, obviously, but I want you to explode into action. See, thinking won't help you because thinking moves way too slowly. What'll help you is something that we always have at our capacity. It's part of our fight and flight system, which is boom, explode into action. I think it was, I forget which boxer it was, Bruce Lee, I think it was. They said that he was able to knock someone out moving from a stationary position 3 inches away from the guy. He was able to knock people out. That's an explosion. And if you don't think, but rather just simply explode the moment you get paralyzed like that, you'll see your body will respond to it and you'll move faster than you thought yourself capable of. But the key is don't think. Thinking is too slow. Even positive thinking is too slow. Exploding into action, that'll actually help you.
And I'm going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but I would highly recommend that you come up with a figure that embodies those sets of fears and insecurities and like all of that you said. There's an emotional being there. Again, we would call it the shadow. And I would really, really encourage you. I'm working with an NHL player right now, and this is a lot of the work we do is real performance-based stuff. And just having the part of him with him in real time that is afraid and ashamed. And he went through some stuff in his past around the sport. And so we identified that was all that psychic material, the traumas and things that we've been through is kind of abstract and free floating in our psyches. And so when you create a shadow companion who you keep with you all the time, that is almost like the amalgamation, the crystallization of those feelings, come up with a guy who you can keep with you. And then your job becomes in the moment, pre-game, 100%. I love you. I see you. I'm not hiding you. I'm not hiding from you, and I'm not hiding you from the world. Come into the experience with me. And if you can, this would be a practice. This is what we teach people. This is all neurocircuitry. So you can have what we call split screen attention, where I'm talking to you and I've got my shadow here with me right now. Like over time, you can have that. That's just imagination, mindset, will. Humans are powerful. So you'll be able eventually to have him even with you on the diamond, coming up to bat or whatever it is. And just it seems so simple, but the act of keeping that part with you and loving him will open you up in so many ways, get you out of those fears. It's like the act of you sending him love and acceptance, no matter what happens. And you want to blend it with, I'm not judging us on the results of this. I'm judging us on staying connected and showing up in life united together. And as long as we do that, I promise, whether we hit a home run or we don't, or we strike out, I'll consider it a victory. And if you practice, that's like a 3-step. That's like a dance that you do with yourself, which retrains your brain, which all of us are like, you're a worthless piece of shit, you're going to fuck it up, and I'm going to punish you after for doing it. How could you ever perform if you're in that talk? So the shadow piece that I just walked you through kind of rewires it in the moment. And you have to practice it. I've practiced this tool so many times. I didn't even believe it in the beginning, but I tell myself, I love you. You have to go up on this panel. I've got my shy little girl, and she's afraid that she's going to sound stupid and not nearly as smart as Barry, and I just say to her before I say, hey, all we're here to do is shine our light together. As long as we show up together, even if we don't make any sense, if we're stupid, if, blah, 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 people judge you, I am sending you unconditional acceptance and love. And my love for you is not conditional on this. We'll keep taking risks together till the end of time. This is just one of many. And I love you before, during, and after. You remember your shadow during the game. And then after, you say to that part of yourself, we did it. Even if that part X, as we call it, the negativity is going to come in, it always comes in on the back end of any action or risk and starts to say, you shoulda, you coulda, what'd you do, man? You messed it up. That's when you have to remember, you say to your shadow, I get it. Maybe next time we'll do better, but I made a promise to you that as long as we showed up together and stayed connected, I would love you and accept you, and I'm holding by that promise. If you keep practicing it, it'll become a feedback loop that is the truth for you, and you just got to practice.
I just want to add one thing, which is there's a particular moment that I think is really critical for you, which is the moment you commit the error. That's the moment where I want you to turn to your shadow and say, I love you. I love you always, forever. Doesn't matter, kind of thing. You'll find that you recover from the error much more quickly if you do that. Then also overall, you'll commit fewer errors because you'll be more in a state of grace.
Anybody else? Okay. If not, give it a hand for these amazing panelists. Thank you to you all. Thank you all for being here. I want you to know that your presence here today has gone directly to fund the incredible research that AIM puts on. And I really encourage you all to check out their website, follow us on Instagram, stay in touch, and please stay in touch because we're doing more of this. This is an event series. So if it's your first time here, we do these every few months. We'll be doing another one soon. So hope to see you back. Okay. And thank you, DOGPOUND. Woo!